Sweet. Happy Friday, Josh.
Happy Friday. I am ending a day where I didn't have literally a single opening on my calendar, like not even one 15, 10-minute slot, like back to back to back to back. The exciting news is that means I talked to like 15, 20 counselors today, new counselors who are joining or wanting to join our programs. So if you want to continue to keep my calendar full and you're watching this right now, feel free to book a call.
Yeah, keep Josh busy. That's the rally.
Busy.
I like that. Today we are talking about money. We are talking about money. So how do you want to start this? Should we start it income? Should we start with like framing, like the framing of money, or like the relativity of money?
Some counselors are motivated by money, but I'd say the average counselor did not get into private practice or did not get into therapy as a service in general because you wanted to make millions of dollars, right? There was almost this expectation, whether it comes from grad school or other sources of voices or other things, that you won't be making a lot of money if you go into this industry. But there's this weird dichotomy where you see these people with multi-6-figure income goals or multi-7-figure income goals, and you see all of these resources as a business owner, as a private practice owner, on like how to make more money, how to raise your rates, and like there's a lot of puzzle pieces on the table. But for many of the counselors, and I'd say just business owners in general, because I've had to grow through this a lot, and I know you have too, Attilio, is growing your mindset and growing your skills around being more competent with your money, earning your money, and spending your money as a business owner, not just as a human. And maybe you can speak a little bit to like the difference between just having money as a person and having money as a business owner, which is very different when it's coming from your business.
Yeah, so I think this kind of opens up the and maybe you've seen this graphic. It's 4 quadrants. It's like 4 ways you can make your money. You can be employed. You can have an income coming from someone else. And this income is not dependent on maybe necessarily your time or like your production, like the value you're providing, right? So this is like a salary. Sometimes as a contractor, if you're a contractor and you remain pretty full, I would categorize you as this bucket. That's that employee. You're an employee bucket. Then beyond that is your self-employed, the self-employed bucket. And the self-employed bucket means that you own your job, right? So you are the owner of a business likely, but you're not scaled. You're not creating like you're not working in an environment where you own a system that is creating cash for you. You're in an environment where you are the system. Like you're taking the phone calls, you're doing the sessions. So that's like the self-employed bucket. And you make a little bit more money than employees oftentimes, but you have to do more work. Then there's another bucket where you're like a corporate owner, like you're a practice owner. You're an owner of a practice. And this is where you are scaled out. You are compensated not on how much time you're spending. You are compensated almost entirely on how effectively you are at managing your systems or how effective you are at managing your people. And then the final bucket is the investor bucket, which is like you've taken a sum of money, put it somewhere, and you create some type of dividend or residual income. So those are the 4 big buckets of like how people make money. And so I feel like when we talk to a therapist, you're in one of those first 2 buckets, like maybe 1%, 1 to 2% of therapists that we talk to are actually in the 3rd bucket where they're no longer compensated on Maybe they're like billable hour time, and they're really compensated on how effective the business runs, how effective their practice runs. I almost never see any therapists, unless you're just like privately doing it, who act as an investor or work at that level with money. And so that means you're in the employee bucket or you're in the self-employed bucket. And so have no fear. You just need to learn a little bit about money to find how to break yourself out, or how to break the cycle of staying inside of those buckets. Josh, did that kind of touch on where you wanted me to go with that? I know that was a leading question.
Yeah, I think at the end of it, it's just a fundamental different process for most of you when you're entering out of having a full-time group, being employed by a group practice and having everything taken care of for you. You might be doing a cost split, but at the end of the day, show up, you do your therapy with your clients, and you go home. And your money isn't as inextricably tied to your performance as an individual. When you start to move into the self-employment category, when you start to move into owning businesses, whatever stage of insourced, outsourced you're in, that income is much more directly tied to you, which means whatever mindsets you have about money, whatever mindsets you have about how much you're worth, whatever mindsets you have about what you should charge or how you should spend your money, whatever skills you have on spending money as a business owner are now the reflection of the progress you have. Because if you think you're only worth $60 an hour, and that's what you charge, that dictates a reality of how much you can earn, no matter how many sessions you do, versus someone else who charges $350 an hour, right? You both do 10 sessions, and one earns $600 and the other one earns thousands, right? Or on the flip side, one person knows how to spend $100 in their private practice to help move their business forward, and the other person doesn't know how to spend $100, and so they remain stuck.
Yeah. Something I think that is absolutely crippling, and I think I kind of had to wrap my head around this. I hope I have two huge points that I hope we get to in this call. This is probably one of them. But one of the big things that it took me a while to wrap my head around this, maybe like a year to like really understand it and really be able to embody it. But money, like the sizes of money and income, is relative to the amount that you're willing to sacrifice or spend to reach that income level. So if you're ready to make $1 million, if you're ready to make $100,000, you have to spend to fix $100,000 problems, right? So you have to spend to fix $1 million problems. And so like the problems that you have to fix, the solutions that you have to create for your practice are now at a much higher, they're worth at a much higher level. And so you have to spend relative to where you want to go. And that's kind of a weird, abstract way to think about cost and sacrifices, like time sacrifices that you have to make. But when it boils down to it, you'll start catching yourself asking, you'll ask yourself, am I spending the right amount of money to solve my problem? Because maybe my problem is worth to me $1 million. Like my problem is worth to me $1 million. If I can fix this problem, it could potentially help me get to $1 million. And so am I willing to spend $100,000 to fix my $1 million problem? Equally, if you're at a lower level and you're like, man, I could really use $10,000 right now. Are you willing to spend $1,000 to fix a $10,000 problem? And so I think that that's just like an easy way to start thinking about like, how much are my problems worth for me? Like really, how much are my problems worth for me?
How much are my problems worth to me?
So how much are my problems worth to me? Look at it at like a year scale. Never look at a problem in like a 30-day scale, because that's a terrible way to set yourself up for failure.
Slow that down. Why is that? Why is that?
Yeah, it's because things take time. Period. Usually there's skills that you don't know that you have to acquire. Usually there's other problems that come up, especially if you're starting to, if you're like, Attilio, I have a goal that I want to make $100,000 in my private practice this year. I'll tell you, okay, so that means in 1 year time, we want to make $100,000. That means you would need to expect to spend equivalent to fixing $100,000 problem. And so with $10,000 in a year, maybe you can fix that $100,000 problem. And so it gives you a little bit of runway. It gives you a little bit more. It gives you a little bit more spend. So you can think about your spend a little bit differently. And you're like, Attilio, I don't have $10,000 in my bank account. How can I make it to 6 figures? You have to consistently find problems to fix, and figure out how to max those things out. And that means in 1 year, not 30 days, in 1 year, you're fixing a problem of creating a system that's effective for you to get you to $100,000 of income. And that means time, that means cash spent, that means a lot of things inside of that. What do I need to sacrifice? What do I need to spend to make my $100,000 problem go away?
And I'll give 2 examples that came up a lot this week, that we get a lot in the counseling world. So there's a very popular EHR who just raised their prices, and counselors are an outcry over it. And a lot of them are leaving the practice, like that EHR in droves and moving on to other things. And you guys are all looking to spend the least amount you possibly can on your EHR, right? What kind of problems does your EHR solve for you? And most EHRs are anywhere from 60 to maybe $200 a month, which is a couple $100 to a couple grand across an entire year, okay? So ask yourself this. I would say that these medical records, for the billing they do, for the scheduling they do, for the information they track for you, for the customer service they provide, and all of those things, provides a disproportionate amount of value to you as a counselor than what you're actually spending. The only reason why they are charging so little is because they're playing a volume game. They can work with 300,000 counselors in the industry and still make their money, but they wouldn't have it, like, they'd be charging you $1,000 a month, $10,000 a year, easy, if the industry was just slightly smaller. Because I can tell you right now, almost anyone who's watching this would say, oh my goodness, there's no way I could run my practice without an EHR. That means they're solving a huge problem in your business. On the flip side, we've got something like referral generating. Without new referrals for your therapy practice, your practice is dead. So any service that provides consistent referrals for you is solving a huge problem, one of the most important problems for your business as well. So if you spend $30 a month on your Psychology Today and you only get 3 referrals from it and 1 becomes a client, and that client is spending $100 to $350 per session, Psychology Today is providing a disproportionate amount of value for the amount of money you're giving them to spend the problem. In that fashion, it's actually smart money that you're spending as a business owner.
Yeah, that's a great point. I like looking at like shaping up the actual I think the frame of reference is what's shifted oftentimes. And I think this is just the frame of reference that we see from an employee perspective, where we're making a set income, where we're making and we're spending in levels of like 10s or 100s. So our frame of reference is 10s and 100s. Our frame of reference is set income of $4,500 a month. And so our frame of mind, our reference point is like very small, and like it lives in this little tiny world where tens and hundreds add up to be thousands, and that's like enormous. And so what I would challenge each of you to do if you're watching this video is to stop thinking with that frame of reference. Like, you've now created a box for yourself, and you've created an environment where you can only see in tens and hundreds. When I started seeing things in thousands and tens and thousands and hundreds of thousands, like, just start looking at big numbers, and it might help you break out of this mindset. But you understand that in order to run a 6-figure practice, you have to have like costs. You have to have costs that are in the tens of thousands of range. And so similarly, if you're running $1 million practice, you'll have hundreds of thousands of dollars of costs. And so are you prepared to spend that amount? Are you prepared to spend the cost to make it to that level of impact that you're creating for the industry? And so maybe start thinking with more zeros at the end of your numbers, and imagine how the frame of reference kind of like starts pulling you out. Like, do you think Elon Musk has a problem with spending $100,000? Absolutely not. He spends $100,000 on one employee a year, I'm sure. More. Like, just one engineer for Elon's team is probably $100,000. Just like one really good PhD or supervisor is probably worth 6 figures in a solid practice. And so, like, think about that. But this PhD, this supervisor, is probably helping you create $250,000 or $300,000 of revenue, if you know what you're doing.
So thinking in tens and 100s is a byproduct of your money mindset coming into running a business. And one thing that was told to me by one of my business coaches is, if you are a cheap person, you will be a cheap business owner, and you will be a cheap service provider. If you are an abundant person, and this doesn't just mean spending money for the sake of spending money or buying the most expensive version, like being cheap and being like frugal and wise are on the opposite end of the spectrums, actually. And I'd say a lot of counselors bring in not frugality, which is saying, I'm going to spend the money, I'm just going to be wise about how I spend it, right? Being cheap means you're looking for the bottom dollar option to, quote unquote, get you what you want done. It's buying the cheap lumber and the cheap paint and the cheap appliance and the cheap whatever. And we know from experience with most things in life, the cheaper you go, and there are some exceptions to this rule as with everything, but the cheaper you go, the more quickly it's not going to work for you, the more quickly it's going to break, the more quickly it's going to fall short of the expectations you placed upon it. You go to the dollar store and buy anything in that store, you don't have super high expectations for it, right? If you go and like, if you buy a pair of sunglasses from the dollar store, how quickly do you lose those and do those disappear? You go spend $100 on a pair of Ray-Bans or whatever it is. How much more do you take care of it, and how much more value do you get from it? So when you, and we get this all the time. I had a phone call with a counselor earlier today, and they asked, oh, do you have a slightly lower cost campaign to run Google ads for you? And it was the difference of $100. Okay. Like, do you have $100 cheaper campaign? And it wasn't because she didn't have the cash in the bank. Like, I'm trying to be frugal. This is my last $400. It was, I'm just trying to be cheap. Can we get the same result for $100 less just because that sounds better to me? The answer is probably no. So I think from that standpoint, when you're evaluating a service, do you want the people you buy from for marketing? Do you want the people you employ? Do you want the service providers and the software? Do you want them to be a cheap product? Or do you want to run a business with other providers who are providing the services to help you run your business that are wise and are frugal and are having abundance in how they provide things, and they need to charge a certain amount to provide that level of service.
Yeah. That's a very good point. Like you have a price point that you need to profit on and live at and create space for growth within your practice. Just like everyone else has their like numbers that make sense for them. And it, man, that $100 example just like hits so much to the core. It's like, I, I think sometimes it's hard to see past, like maybe $100 feels good like right now, like, oh man, I could save $100, but it's like literally pennies at the end of a year. It's like literally pennies at the end of the year, especially as you move into like not the first bucket, the employee bucket, not the second bucket, the self-employed bucket, because maybe it feels a little expensive in self-employed. But once you're at like this third bucket, like literally $100 a month is like nothing. I have I have stopped. I don't care about anything until it's in the thousands range now for myself. Like trying to like nickel and dime, like little bits of things here and there, oftentimes just create one, it takes you more time to find something that's going to be at that price point. Two, it often puts you in a position where you have to do a little bit more work. And three, you're often just like spending time trying to save like a little bit of cash here and there when it's like you could just prioritize taking action and making the moves and go moving on to the next thing if it doesn't work for you. So it's just, that hurts me that you had to go through that, Joshua.
Hurts the counselor that they had to go through that.
Yeah.
But here's the lesson, and one of the points that I want to bring this around to. I have struggled personally knowing when and how to invest money into my business. And the reason why that is when you first become a business owner, there's this really weird thing that happens if you don't have like your money to run your business is also your money to live your life off of, which is why it's really hard to emotionally spend money on the business and spend money on yourself for the business and growing the business, because that means that's less money to like literally sometimes put food on the table for your family. And the unfortunate truth that you need to walk away with when you're that I've had to learn in multiple times, multiple series, is it takes money to solve problems in your business, and it takes money to just run certain components of your business. And you will not see the success you want in your business until you implement some of those things that just cost money. And if you're not having the success that you want because you've always been apprehensive about spending money on ads, or you've always been apprehensive about getting that EHR that has a couple of those functions that you know would be helpful and save you more time, or that piece of marketing software, or that business coach. Those are things that, although they look like they're taking away from the food on the table, in some ways they are, but they're also keeping you from having the success you need to having all of the rest of the income to put money on the, like to put food on the table. And you have to take a sacrifice in the short term as a business owner to do the necessary actions. And sometimes that requires spending the money to get the overall result of having a business that makes money.
I think one of the most powerful things I've ever been told from a business coach of mine was the top priority of a business that is not at $1 million level. So the top priority for a business and a practice that's not at a $1 million level. So think about that. That's a lot of you who are not there yet. And some of you will never, ever get here. And maybe it's because you don't want to, or maybe it's because whatever, but some of you will never get to that $1 million level. And so your top priority, your number one responsibility isn't to cut costs. It is not to cut costs. Your number one responsibility is to create revenue for yourself. Your number one responsibility is to create more money than you're spending. Then once you've started reaching a point where it makes sense to dial in and look at your costs, then you can go in and dial in and look at your costs. And the reason why that's so important, and why that was so important for me, is because once you're no longer an employee, your income is pretty much not capped anymore. So you are keeping yourself in a bucket. You are keeping yourself in a, like, under an income level. And the reason you're there is because you're not spending the amount of time or spending the amount of money to get you to a higher income. So when you're self-employed, you can always reach that higher income point. And so once you start reaching a higher income point, you're maybe spending more money. And now it makes sense to say, okay, what kinds of things can I remove from my costs and keep my income at the same level? So what kinds of things can I and you can test this. What kinds of things can I test to remove from my costs? Or what kinds of things can I reduce my costs on, but keep my income at about the same? And so that's how you, quote unquote, save costs. That's how you make money, by cutting costs. Otherwise, your first priority should always be to make more money. It should be to collect more, because you can push past your barriers. You can push past your $4,500 a month barrier. So figure out how to collect $10,000 in a month, and then look at your costs. And to me, that just like was a big switch for me in my brain. I hope maybe that helped clicks for someone, but creating the income for yourself first is the most important thing. Then you can cut costs, because here's the thing, honestly, sometimes it's not even worth cutting costs. Sometimes it takes more time to figure out how to cut a cost than to just keep the cost there. Yeah. Period.
Sometimes it's just about saying, and we literally asked this question to ourselves earlier this week, is how can I utilize, like, the best investment I can make is getting more value out of the money that we're currently spending. So we had an employee that we were looking at, and it's like, man, this person isn't performing. Well, scarcity mindset is like, great, let's cut it. But abundance mindset is saying, oh, what can I change so this person performs at a higher level? So we actually make the return on investment that we're spending here. And sometimes it's just about giving it time. One of our first programs we ever launched for counselors was like $2,500 a month, right? And in that program, it did a lot of different things. But one of the things that we looked at is, what is the return on investment from spending $2,500, right? And here's the thing that, like, the truth is typically if you get one client that sticks with you for about 6 months, which is about 25 sessions, if they come to you weekly, at $100 a session, that's $2,500. So for us, it was like, we're charging $2,500 for this program. And there was a disproportionate amount of value in that, because certainly any person who booked with that program got more than one client. And here was one secret that was told to us when we launched that program, is we would be willing to spend more, or around $2,500, to acquire one client, because that client would stay with us or spend more money on the program or some of those things. So if you're sitting here and you're wondering, great, how does this math add up? Well, do you spend $100 to acquire one client? Do you spend $150? Do you spend twice as much as they might pay you for one session? Let's say you want to charge $350 a session. You could spend $700 per client just to acquire them, and they stay for 3 sessions, and suddenly you're making money. As a counselor, you have such an ability to literally look at the session rate that you charge and say, I'm going to spend $100 on marketing or $200 on marketing to acquire one client, because you know you'll make that back. So if you're struggling to wrap your head around, how do I spend money as a business owner? to acquire more referrals, literally take your session rate and be open to spending 1 to 2 times the amount of that session rate to acquire one client. There are ways to make that lower and to get that to happen for a lot less. But at minimum, that seems pretty reasonable to me to spend $100 to get a client to spend anywhere from $1,000 to $4,000 with you.
Yeah, that's assuming that they only stick around for a few sessions, right? Sometimes we get lifelong clients, who knows? And they keep spending and they spend and spend and spend and spend, and you've got just a wheel for yourself there. So
for you, if you have an empty caseload and you say, I have 15 open slots, that actually might mean you need to spend anywhere from $1,500 to $6,000 to fill those slots. I know you don't want to spend that. I know you don't want to spend that. I don't want to spend $2,500 to acquire a client, right? Like no one wants to spend that. However, logic, business owner mindset tells us, not like personal ownership, this is my money, but like business logic, owner mindset says, oh, I should be excited to spend $1,500 to acquire 15 new clients, because that math adds up every single time in the most exciting way possible.
yeah, that's an extra $15,000 potentially.
Potentially, if not more.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you're saying, I want to earn 100,000 to 180,000 just as a solo practice owner, be willing to spend anywhere from $1,000 to $2,000 a month just on marketing and client acquisition. Yeah. And you have a very successful business if that's what you're doing. But if we take a poll, most counselors, other than maybe a little bit of like their EHR software and their $30 Psych Today profile, they are spending pennies on marketing, and they're wondering why their business isn't being successful, and then their wallet is also still empty.
The interesting thing is too on that is like, keep in mind the frame of reference. So one, if Joshua just said spend $1,000 to $2,500 and you're like, whoa. So keep in mind the frame of reference. Maybe you're just not used to seeing things from that frame of reference. And then now we're looking at the realistic side of it. If you're spending like $100 or $500, like maybe you should only be expecting like 1 to 2 clients in like 2 months. Like that's the realistic point of view, like breaking those numbers down. Even if you're getting a 10 times return on investment, which is the numbers that we've been doing, right? We've been saying spend 1,000 and you'll get potentially $10,000 of lifetime value in your clients. So even if we're looking at a 10x return on investment and you zoom that down to like the $100 or the $500 level, like $100 could maybe get you $1,000. Like that's a 10x ROI. So that's like one new client, like one client who comes in at 150 for 8 sessions, something like that. And then equally, if you're spending $500, maybe you're really only looking at getting like 1 or 2 clients. And so is that the problem that you want to solve? Is that what is that the rate of growth that you'd like to grow at? And if you're saying no, then maybe you need to up the spend. So that's something really interesting. I think too, another interesting thing that I was told from a business coach was like, sometimes the only way to solve the problem is to spend more money. And they were specifically talking about advertisement. It's like, sometimes you don't have to get more clever. Sometimes you don't have to like get a new website or like find a new process or like now I have to do social media or now I have to start doing blogging or whatever. Sometimes you just have to take what you're doing and spend a ton more on it.
And a really good example of this is I talk to hundreds of counselors every couple of months that have tried a Google ad or a Facebook ad, but they've told me that, oh yeah, I tried $20. I tried $100. The counselors who have success are spending between like minimum 300 across a 2 to 4 week time frame. Most of them are spending $500 to $2,500 a month on ads to make it viable for their business. Same with SEO. Oh, I pay an SEO company $30 a month to do my SEO for them. Great. That's going to the dollar store for your SEO, right? Like in other industries, there's like $10,000 to $20,000 SEO vendor packages. And that's like a good deal because of the return on investment that's going to bring. So as we kind of wrap up this conversation, is typically, unfortunately, in this day and age, as we get out of the age of insurances just providing all of your leads to you, and we're now in this age of large listing sites who shall not be named that are employing counselors in ways that aren't paying you guys a lot. If you want to get out of that rat race, you have to spend like business owners spend. And that amount is unfortunately larger than what you're probably comfortable with spending, which means the skill that you need to acquire is getting more comfortable spending more money on your business, not how do I spend less money on my business to achieve the same results. We teach lots of free strategies. For instance, Google My Business, and there's a great video in our Facebook group on this. It requires $0, requires a little bit of time, gets great results for your business. So I'm not saying that like everything should cost money when you run a business. No, some of the best strategies to get clients are free. However, if you want to go quickly, if you want to go efficiently, if you want to go concisely, and if you want to scale to the size that you want, it's going to require money to invest, and probably more than what you're currently comfortable spending.
Great points. This is I really like this one. Some of this dug up some information that I haven't thought about in a while, but I know that it's like so deeply ingrained for me now, so it's kind of nostalgic to like jump back in on it. It's a good points.
We're coming at this from people who have built like multi-6, multi-7-figure businesses in the counseling space and outside the counseling space. And so there was a scenario where I had never spent any money on my business ever before, right? And I remember literally hemming and hawing for days whether I wanted to buy this $97 masterclass, right? And like it was a challenge and it was difficult, and I felt really guilty after I bought it. Like I had serious buyer's remorse for spending $100. I watched the training, I started implementing the strategies, and a couple months later I was making over 10K a month in my business from that video. And it also gave me confidence in other reasons that like I invested thousands of dollars into a different program and coach to get other help that I wanted and needed. So all to say is we have a $97 program. And I'm not bringing this up to like pitch it or sell to you in any specific way, but we have a lot of counselors who take the leap on that $100 program. And we've priced it at a point that we hopefully that it makes sense for you guys. But I know the feeling of me trying to spend my first $100 on a business. And I'm not saying that it's easy, because it isn't, but it is something that is necessary for you to grow as a practice owner.
It's like once you do it, then you start like, I feel like the quicker you are to spend, the quicker money can come back to you. It's kind of like to your point a second ago, maybe this can be the last point, little thing here, but like when you're a frugal buyer, like that's also how you're selling yourself, or when you're a cheap seller. And so the way you buy is the way you sell, right? And so how would you want people to buy your services from you? That should be how you yourself buy other services. And so if you want to be an action taker, if you want people to be committed when they hop on the phone with you, if you want people to be ready to take action when they're on the phone with you, you should also be able to embody that as a buyer. And so I've heard this so much. This was my favorite, probably my favorite sales coach of all time, who taught me that. He's like, the way that you buy is the way that you sell, or the way that you sell is the way that you buy. And so you can change how you sell, like you can change your effectiveness on sales by changing the way that you buy. So the quicker you are to spend money in kind of some weird ways, you'll have to try this, test it on whatever. But like maybe just go out and like buy that thing that you've been wanting to buy, or like do whatever, do that experience that you've been wanting to do, and just like don't think about it. Tell yourself you're not going to think about it and just spend the money, do the thing, and you'll see like the return is just quick and much larger. So kind of an interesting way to try going about things, but I hope that helps y'all.
We'll see y'all next week.
See ya.